So we discussed this central force motion in the last lecture, and more or less we have covered the important aspects or the analysis to describe motion under a central force. Particularly we are interested in this 1 over r kind of force, 1 over r kind of potential, so 1 over r square kind of force, right, which is the representative of the gravitational interaction and as well as the electrostatic interaction, right. So now other things which are there in the book, they can be looked at, and you can yourself work out analysis of other remaining topics. What I will do here is probably discuss this orbits, or rather discuss the nature of the orbit slightly more, and then take up a few examples, right? So a few interesting examples, and then end it here, right? And after that we will begin after the mid-sim. Okay. So what we had was we found out that orbit for this potential. So if we make a choice, suitable choice of the potential, which is the gravitational potential, so minus c over r, then the orbit of the object is written as 1 minus epsilon cos theta, right? And for particular choice, well, e is less than 0, this gives us an elliptical shape. So this is the orbit, right? So in xy plane or r theta plane, this is the orbit of an object which is under central force, and this object for our analysis was this fictitious object with reduced mass mu. And what we can do is we can always get back to our actual masses m1 and m2. Okay, and the origin of the force is at the center of mass, right? Distance is r, and this is how the r is changing as a function of theta, right? Okay, so now what we can do is we can assign certain measurable parameters, right, by looking at this equation, and then we can connect the energy and angular momentum of the system with those measurable parameters, right? So for example, we can look at the distances, right? So there is one distance, let's call it r max, and there is another distance, let's call it r min, right? So these are the two points in the orbit, right, when the object is in one case farthest away from the origin of this force, right, and in the other case it's closest to the origin of the force, right. So we can define these distances, and if we look at this equation, we will see that at theta equal to 0, right, r will be r max, and its value will be then r0 over 1 minus epsilon, right. Similarly, at theta equal to pi, so that is this location, this r or the orbital distance will be minimum, so r min, and its value will be r0 1 plus epsilon, right. We also define another quantity which is then the total length of this orbit, right, or the maximum length distance of the combined distance from the origin. So defined as, it's also known as the semi-major axis, right. Let's write down as A, which is described as r min plus r max, right. And now we can use this definition of r min and r max to define the semi-major axis as 2r0 1 minus epsilon square. So then this is my semi-major axis, and what we can do is we can put back our expressions for r0 and epsilon, which were in terms of the total energy of the system E and the angular momentum L, right, to get a value for A. And if we do that, we will see that A simply comes out to be minus C over E, where C is then characteristic of this force. So in our case, this will be G, M1, M2, and those kind of terms. So anyway, so the semi-major axis for a particular orbit with a given energy is given by this, and what that means is, if I reverse this, then it tells me that the energy of a particular orbit depends on its semi-major axis, and the nature of the potential, right, independent of the angular momentum of the system, right. So what we can also say is then in that case that all the orbits, like whatever is the shape, so basically whatever is the ellipticity, all the orbits with the same major axis, right. So r1 plus r max, if it's same for two orbits, for example, the drawn one is 1, and let us say I have another one which is slightly more circular, right. So something like this, right. And as long as this distance and this distance is same, or the same major axis of both these orbits is same, the energy of these two orbits is also going to be same, right. Okay. So this is one interesting feature of these orbits. We can also find out the velocity, the speed, well not velocity, the speed of object going around these closed orbits, and for that what we can do is we can write down again the energy. So energy, and we wrote down energy as mu and well r dot square, and in this case now minus c over r, so the kinetic energy and the potential energy, right, and then this is nothing but v square, so half mu, let's say v square minus c over r, and now we can use our expression for energy here. So this was also minus c over a, right, is this, and from here we can write down the velocity, which is then given as 2c by mu 1 over r minus 1 over a. So the velocity of the object going about these orbits at any location, right, so at any distance r, is then given by this expression. So r is the incidence position and a is the same major axis. So again, this velocity is also governed by the same major axis. Okay. So that's it. And beyond this, now one other interesting exercise is to consider a different potential. So to consider a repulsive potential. For example, something which goes as c plus c over r, and this is the representative of the repulsion between two like charges, right? And one can do exactly same analysis. We'll again see that we get a conic section equation, which then again, depending on the nature of this potential, we can see what kind of conic sections are possible to get this. This again I'll leave as an exercise for you. So it's solved in the book, in different textbooks, right? And basically it's another way of looking at Rutherford scattering of charged particles. So anyway, this is left for you as an exercise, and that more or less finishes our discussion about this central force motion. And what we'll do is, very quickly, we'll take a couple of examples, right, and then end it. So the first example I want to talk about is geostationary satellites. And geostationary satellites are basically artificial satellites sent from Earth. Right? They go about in very high circular orbits, right? And the unique thing is, so let's say I start at this location, I launch a satellite, I park it somewhere here, right? The uniqueness of geostationary satellites is, as the name suggests, they always point, or they are always in sync with the same location on Earth at any given point of time. And what then basically means is that if Earth is going with angular velocity omega, then this geostationary satellite is also going with angular velocity omega, right? So it's always facing at the exactly same spot on Earth, and that's how you can get continuous 24-hour coverage for telecommunications as well as television transmission. So anyway, so the properties of geostationary satellites. So what we can do is we can very quickly, using our analysis, try to calculate what should be the distance, right? So this r, what should be the distance at which the satellite should orbit to be in a geostationary state? Right? So again, so what we want is, first of all, the orbit is circular, and so that means it has a particular distance which is maintained throughout the for all the angles. Right? So r0. Also, the orbital speed is equal to rotational speed of Earth. Right? So we know what is the rotational speed of Earth. It goes 2 pi radians in 24 hours. So that should be also maintained there. And now from here, we can try to find out what is the same major axis or this distance r. Right? So A in this case is going to be twice of r0, is circular orbit. So r min plus r max, simply A, is twice of r0. Also, since we did the analysis for the reduced mass, so either we can start from there and then convert back into actual masses, or we can say that mass of Earth is much greater than the mass of the satellite, right? Which is normally true. Mass of Earth is in something on the order of 10 to 24 kgs, whereas the satellite would maximum weigh about 2000 kgs or 4000 kgs or at the most 10,000 kgs of that order, right? So mass of Earth is much greater than mass of satellite, and this would imply that the reduced mass in for our system is just basically same as mass of the satellite. So we don't have to do any we don't have to further get the values by putting these actual masses. We can simply work with the mass of satellite as our reduced mass. C in this case, again G, M of Earth, mass of satellite and all that. So we can write it down as mass of satellite, the acceleration due to gravity, and the radius of Earth. Right. So we have removed that capital G and instead written down this in terms of the small g and radius of Earth. So we simply did this because this value is rather simple. We can take it 9.8 meter per second or 10 meters per second square. Right. However, the value of the capital G is a complicated expression. Right. So anyway, just to simplify the calculations, velocity, we know that this velocity has to be same as the rotational velocity of Earth. So then r0 omega of Earth, and omega of Earth is nothing but omega of Earth is 2 pi over 24 hours, so 864 seconds, right? So these values we know. We know what is the radius of Earth. Radius of Earth is again 6400 kilometers. G is just the acceleration constant. So now, with all these values, we can use the expression we derived. So we can use the expression we derived for orbital velocity in this and then equate it to the angular speed of Earth. So we know that v square is 2c over mu 1 over r minus 1 over a, which is now, so r0 to r0, right? And this is equal to r0 omega square. So now we can solve this for r0, right? And what we'll get is, so you do that, we'll get an expression for r0 which looks something like this. So r0 cube is g re square over omega e square, right? So this is then my expression for r0, and if we calculate r0, it comes out to be, well, approximately 354 kilometers, right? So again, this is from the center of the Earth. So satellite has to be parked from here. From the surface, you subtract 6400 kilometers from here, and then you get the distance from the surface. We can put this back, get the velocity also, right? And this comes out to be about 3070 meters per second. So anyway, these are simple calculations which you can do, right? And look for the quantities that are needed. Okay. Now another interesting thing related to this analysis is that, so what we found out is if we want to put these satellites into geostationary orbits, which nowadays we are regularly doing, what we need is we need to send a satellite from here to, let's say, about something like 35,000 kilometers up, right? And that's a lot of distance. 35,000 kilometers is a large amount of distance. And then you need a lot of energy, you need bigger rockets and all that. Now in practice, what happens is we seldom or we rarely, in fact, we never put the satellite directly in these kind of higher circular orbits, right? In fact, all the satellites which are placed in orbit around the Earth, they never go to their desired location while during the launch. We normally put the satellites into highly elliptical transfer orbits. So then this relates to this transfer orbits or orbits or the transfer of satellite into different orbits. So what you do is, let's say this is my Earth, right? And we want to put the satellite, let us say, in some kind of at this distance, right? It could be circular, could be elliptical, doesn't matter, right? So normally what you do is you start from the surface of the Earth, depends on at what longitude, latitude you want to send it. But anyway, let's suppose we want to put it here, right? What we do is we normally first find out an elliptical orbit, right, with large enough eccentricity such that it looks something like this, right? So we'll launch the satellite into this orbit, because here what is happening is we only have to go up to this much, or in best case only for R minimum, and this could be very small compared to the final distance, and this R max would be then much larger. And since the satellite is placed in that elliptical orbit, it will come very close to the Earth and then go very far from the Earth at this point, right? So typically this could be of the order of, let's say, about 1,000 kilometers, whereas then this again could be of the order of 35,000 kilometers, right? If we are actually interested in this geostationary satellite or geostationary orbits, right? So now once you have parked it here, now what you will do is successively we can increase the size of this orbit, and for that basically we need to provide energy, but now we only need to provide energy to the satellite, right? We don't need to provide energy to the rocket itself, because if we are sending satellite by the rocket and now we want my rocket to take it up to this location, then all that mass of the rocket also has to be lifted, right? So that's a huge amount of energy consumption. So once the satellite is parked, it's only about 2,000 kgs. It has its own thrust motors, it has its own weight amount of fuel, right? So now we can increase its energy while in orbit and start changing the orbit. Again, this is also given as an assignment or the tutorial to figure out at what location this energy should be increased. But if you simply look at this diagram, right, what we'll see is at these 2 points, right, the satellite is going in this direction. At these 2 points, its velocity is all tangential, right? It's going tangentially to the plane in the plane, right? This point is called apogee, and this point is called perigee of the orbit. So the farthest point and the closest point. And now what happens is, if I give it a thrust at this point, right, then its orbit is increased to a different ellipticity, and similarly, successively, every time it crosses this location, I can increase this thrust and then change the nature of the orbit, and can make it more or less circular at 35,000 kilometers, right? So this is called, so basically this elliptical orbit will be called a transfer orbit, through which by successively going at this location, you keep on increasing the energy or reducing the energy. In fact, so also we can also do, what we can do is, suppose the satellite is in this orbit, we want it to fall back on Earth, then at a particular location, now once it's in circular orbit, it doesn't matter which side, However, at a particular location, since it's going like this, what we can do is we can give it a reverse thrust to slow down its speed, and once we have slowed down its speed, it will start going into this elliptical orbit, right? And by successfully slowing it down, all we want is that the speed is so low that it goes and the orbit intersects with the Earth, and then basically satellite is falling in the Earth, right? And then of course once it enters the atmosphere, you have not the satellite but at least the spaceship, right? It will have some flying capability, so you can nicely land it on the ground or on water, right? So anyway, here I have just discussed this qualitatively, but in the tutorial and probably in the assignment or in the book also, slightly more quantitative description is given on this, so you can go through that, right? And then try to understand this launching of satellites and then launching of space vehicles, etc. To end, what I do is consider another example, and this is the well-known spring force, right, which is also a central force, as central force. Right. So let us say if the spring force is being acted as the central force, keeping a rotating object or revolving object in a particular path, then how the analysis goes for that. So the system can be taken as this. So anyway, it's a central force. We know that angular momentum will be conserved, so the motion is going to be planar, restricted to 2 dimensions, right? So let's say this is my xy plane. Yeah. Let's say x. Let's say y. Right? And I know that the angular momentum will be then in the z direction, right? And now what we have is, from the center, I have a spring, right, which is free to stretch, and it has a mass connected to it, right, m, right, and the mass is given certain energy. It's going around, let's say in this direction, with certain angular velocity omega, right? And if, let's say, the stretch right now is r0, so it's going in a fixed uniform circular motion. So we are saying uniform circular motion at r0, total energy E0 to begin with, right? So if this is a system, we have to find out for a given energy E0 what will be the R0, given that the force, the spring force, goes as minus kr, so towards the center. So then this becomes my origin, right? So if this is the case, then first of all we know the force balance. It has an outward force mv square over r, v square over r, right? Where v, let's call it v naught, where v naught is the velocity or the speed, r naught is the distance or the radius of the circle. Total energy is E. So what we can write down for this system is mv naught square over r naught is k r naught, the inward force, the spring force. So this is 1, and E0 is half m v naught square, the kinetic energy of the mass, plus the potential energy because of the spring, so half k r0 square, right? So this is my total energy. And now instead of for V0, I can use from 1, I can replace here. So V0 square is simply k r0 square over m. So this will be then half k r0 square plus half k r0 square, or simply k r0 square. And this then tells me that for a given energy E naught, if the system is under uniform circular motion, we can find out its orbit or the radius of its orbit, circular orbit, as E0 by k square. And so once we found the R0, we can also find out V0, right? So now V0 is also known. So we can find out these conditions for the system to be in uniform circular motion. What we can also do is we can draw the energy diagram for this system. So now what is the energy diagram? We start with the energy scale and let's say R, and the energy, so we need to find, so energy is constant, so we need to write down the total energy, and we know that total energy is for these systems is E is equal to kinetic energy plus the effective potential energy, right? And effective potential energy includes the angular momentum component. So this is, so U effective is then L square over 2m R square plus UR, which is half kr square in this case, right? So this is the effective potential for this. Now how does it look? L over R square, that we know goes like this. So 1 over R square term, and on the other side we have R square, right, which basically increases with R. So now in this case, this is going to be like this. So this is 1 over R square, and this is simply R square function. So these are the two functions, and then my effective potential would look a combination of these. So at R tending to 0, this term will go to 0, this term will diverge. At R tending to infinity, this term will go to 0, this term will diverge. So it starts like this, has a minima somewhere, and then follows the behavior of the other one. So now this is my potential, right? Now you have to also keep in mind that it never goes down in the negative side, right? So negative and positive on the potential is not really an absolute term, right? It's not necessary that for bound orbits or something or for barriers you need to have actual negative value here. It's just this scale, right? So here the potential is always positive. However, still we can see that it has this parabolic shape, which is representative of confinement, right? So anyway, so this will be the case, this will be effective potential. So U effective for this system, right? And minima of this will be at R0. And right now, if I want to see this E0 here, this E0 was for the circular orbit. So this is my E0, right? When the system is at the bottom of this well, right? Now, once we written it down like this, we can also find out this R0 from our effective potential. So for R0, since we know that the effective potential is going to be minimum, so that means dUF over dr at R equal to R0 is equal to 0. So one can solve it here, and we know that this is nothing but mv0 R0. This will again be R0, this will be R0. So you can find out what is the value of R0 again in terms of this angular momentum and the constant. It's going to be same as this, right? Or just a different way of writing it down. So if I give you the expression, you just as the exercise, you can try to find it out, and what we'll get is R0 is L square over Km 1 is to the power 1 by 4, right? And so now here's something interesting. It's L square over Km to the power 1 by 4. So what I suggest is, whenever you encounter these kind of expressions, best thing is to confirm the dimensionality, check the dimensionality of the system on both the sides, just to make sure that the expression that we obtain makes sense. Right? Again, the value of L is this. Okay. Now, a slight variation on this problem, right, or an addition on this problem is that, so let's say the system was in this state of uniform circular motion, going nicely about this R0 in a circular orbit. And now what we do is, so let me just draw it again. So let's say this was my center. The mass was here. So at R0, it was nicely going about with some angular velocity omega. And now, instantaneously, I give it a kick, right? I give it a kick in the radial direction, right? So particularly in the radial direction. So it had some velocity v naught, right? And now an additional vr is given in the radial direction. So now we want to see how the motion of the system changes, right? How the motion of the system evolves, right? So now again what we have to understand is, if we give it a kick, right, which is then represented in terms of a radial velocity vr, radial, right? Then what this is going to do to the system is energy will increase, right, or change. Let's take it as a change. So energy will change, 1. Angular momentum. So since the kick has been given in the radial direction, the angular momentum, so and I mean in the sense that what I am saying is, this is Fr and then the motion is also in that same direction. So R cross Fr will be 0 for that particular scenario. So angular momentum will not change. So that's an interesting example, that's an interesting feature of this kind of systems, right? So if I give it a radial kick, see, so I'm not increasing its actual velocity, I'm just giving the kick in the radial direction, right? Which is definitely going to disturb the orbit, right? However, the angular momentum will not change, right? And if the angular momentum does not change, then L is still m v naught r0, whereas my E now, so final E is E0 plus half m vf square, right? And now, so when we find so in the effective potential, again this is the case, U effective is again L square over, or instead of L square then I'll write down m v naught r naught whole square, and here 2m r square, the new radius parameter, plus half k r square, again the new radius parameter, right? So the energy change will have this effect, and what this means on that diagram is that, so E0 was this, now my final energy is slightly larger than E0, so the system has, let's say, this energy EF, and the motion now is not at the minimum of this effective potential, is changed now, it's here, right? And now instead of making a uniform circular motion at R0, the system is going to have a complicated orbital shape, however confined to these two limits, well, R, TP1 and TP2, and I am calling it TP1 and TP2 because these are then the turning points. So the radius can decrease by this, and then suddenly the central force will be strong enough, so effectively saying that the effective potential will be strong enough to repel it, so this will again then start increasing, can stretch up to certain length, go up to this point, and then the central force again will be strong enough to pull it back. So this will keep, so basically this will now oscillate about the radial direction while going around this circle, right? And along the radial coordinate, the orbit or the system will be confined to these two positions. And what we can do is we can also find out what is the value of, or what is the what are these two locations. And for that, all we have to do is we have to see that at these turning points, right? At these turning points, the kinetic energy of the system is 0, and all the energy or the U effective is equal to E final, right? So we can use that. So at RTP, right? And then we'll see that this comes as a quadratic equation, so we'll always get two solutions for RTP, defining the lower and the upper limit. But anyway, at RTP, we know that this is 0, so U effective, which is m V0 R0 square over 2m R TP square plus half k R TP square is equal to this value E0 plus half m VR square, where VR is then the velocity that is given, or the thrust that is given in the z direction. So now you can solve this and find out what is the value of, or what are these RTP. Right? So this is also a problem, I think problem 10.5 in the book of Kepler, where the quantitative details of this system are given. So you can repeat this analysis and try to see what kind of numbers you get, how this orbit deviates from circular nature and then oscillates between these two extreme limits. Okay. So that finishes our syllabus till the mid-semester exam. I have deliberately kept the discussion on central force rather less, so that you get enough time to now recap the previous lecture, the previous material, and prepare for your mid-sem.